I have spent 31 years listening to nothing, and I want to tell you that nothing has a texture. People who have never sat a listening watch imagine silence as an absence, a flat gray hush where a signal might one day appear like a light switched on in a dark house. It is not that. The deep bands are alive with weather. Stars hiss. Cold clouds of gas moan as they fold. Old wrecks tumble and sing their dying songs for centuries after the crews that built them are dust. A man learns the difference between the noise a dead thing makes and the noise a living thing makes, the way a farmer learns weather in his knees. And by the time I took my station aboard the Antiphon, I could tell you, half asleep, whether a return was a rock or a wreck or a working transmitter. And I was right more often than the machines. So when I say that on the 9th day at the rim of the hush I heard something that should not have been there, understand that I did not guess. I knew. We had come out to the hush the way you come to the edge of any cliff you have been warned about your whole life, carefully, and with a rope. Every chart we had, human and borrowed, marked that stretch of the dark the same way. A smeared band of scattered space some 4 light-years deep where signals came apart, where the finest optics turned to milk, where the few probes anyone had ever pushed inside had gone quiet and never spoken again. Our own people called it the hush, which was a listener's name, and I was proud of it. The older species out that way had their own words for it, though we didn't know them yet, and their words were not so plain. The Antiphon was a listening cruiser, which is a polite way of saying she was a warship who had traded some of her teeth for ears. She was long and dark and antenna-crowned, her hull scarred and replated from older postings, and she carried a signal suite that could pull a whisper out of a hurricane if you gave her time and a patient man at the board. I was that patient man. Captain Aldous ran her, and Aldous was the kind of officer who had learned early that the loudest thing in a room is rarely the most important, and had built a career on shutting up and listening. She and I understood each other, on a ship like ours that counts for more than rank. We had been sent to map the rim, not to cross it. Nobody crosses the hush. The orders were plain and the orders were sensible. Hold at the edge, sweep the band, catalog the scatter, learn what we could about why the dark ate signals out there, and come home with clean data. It was survey work, the sort of quiet, unglamorous posting that suits an old signals chief who has stopped wanting glory and started wanting to do one useful thing well before he retires. I had my mug, my dim board, my headset worn soft at the ears, and 4 light-years of forbidden dark to listen to. I was, God help me, content. The pulse came in on the 9th day, and I nearly threw it out. That is the part I think about most. It was so faint, so buried, so far down under the scatter and the star hiss and the general roar of a region that turned everything to mud, that the machines had already flagged it as artifact 3 times and binned it. A repeating tick, barely above the floor, with a period so long, nearly 2 minutes between one faint pulse and the next, that no automated filter tuned for the quick chatter of modern transmitters would ever hold on to it. It looked like a fault. It looked like the ghost you get when a cold receiver warms up wrong. Any reasonable system throws it away, and ours did, 3 times. But I had heard that shape before. Not that signal was new to me, and old to everyone else in a way I didn't understand yet, but that shape. That slow, patient, evenly spaced tick, holding its rhythm across a floor of noise, refusing to speed up or slow down or drift. Machines make ragged noise. Dead things make falling noise, songs that decay. But a steady beat that keeps its time across days, holding on, holding on, holding on, that is the fingerprint of something that wants to be found. A thing does not keep perfect time by accident. Somebody, somewhere, a long time ago, had built a transmitter to do one thing forever. To say here, here, here into the dark on the slowest, most patient, most power-thrifty rhythm they could manage, so that it would still be saying it long after everything else had failed. I pulled it back out of the bin and I sat with it for 11 hours before I told anyone. I want to be honest about that. I did not run to the captain the moment I had it. I stripped it and folded it and stacked hundreds of its cycles on top of one another to lift it out of the noise, and I listened to the same 2-minute gap fill and empty, fill, and empty, until my eyes ached and my mug went cold and the watch changed twice around me, and by the end of it I was no longer content. Because the more I cleaned it, the less it looked like weather and the more it looked like a hand. Under the pulse, riding it, so faint that I had to believe in it before I could hear it, was structure. Not language, I could not read it, I make no such claim, but the bones of language. Groupings. A short burst, a long burst, a pause of a fixed length that came around again and again in the same place, the way a heartbeat has a shape you could draw. Whatever was sending, it was not just shouting here into the dark. It was saying something, over and over, on the slowest breath a machine can take, and it had been saying it for a very long time. I took it to Aldous on the 12th hour, and I remember I set the playback down on the ready room table between us like a man laying a wounded bird on a cloth. "It's inside the hush," I told her. "Best I can place it, 3 light-years deep near the far rim. It's a distress pattern, Captain. I'd bet the rest of my career on it. Something in there is calling for help, and it's been calling long enough that the timing's built to outlast the crew." Aldous did not say anything foolish. She did not tell me it was impossible or that nothing survives the hush or that we had orders. She looked at the playback for a long time, and then she looked at me, and she asked the only question that mattered. "How long, Reuben? How long has it been calling?" I had done that arithmetic already, and I did not like it, and I gave it to her straight. The power curves decayed almost to nothing. If it started anything like what a beacon that size should put out, and it's fallen this far, Captain, I don't want to say a number because the number sounds like a lie. But it's not years, it's generations. Something has been in there calling for help for longer than anyone aboard this ship has been alive, and we're the first to be quiet enough and stubborn enough and close enough to hear it. We sat with that. You have to understand what it is to sit with that. Every instinct a spacefaring people builds up over centuries tells you that the dark keeps its own, that a signal from a place nothing returns from is a trap or a ghost or a grief you cannot fix, and that the mature, disciplined, responsible thing is to log it, mark it, and leave it be. We had orders that said exactly that. Hold at the rim. And under it all was the thing I could not put down, which was that the signal did not know it was hopeless. It kept its time. It said here, here on its slow, patient breath into 4 light-years of dark that had swallowed everyone who ever tried to answer, and it had been saying it faithfully, without speeding up in panic or slowing down in despair, since before I was born. Somewhere in there, something had decided a long time ago that it would keep calling as long as it had power to call, in case someone was finally quiet enough to hear. I have thought a great deal in the years since about why we are the way we are. I have heard the Ashnu try to explain us to themselves, and I have heard our own scholars try, and I do not think any of them have it quite right. But I will tell you what I believe, having been the man at the board. I believe that a distress call is the one sound a human being cannot leave alone. We can leave treasure in the dark. We can leave mysteries and glory and empty worlds waiting to be named. We have left all of those and slept fine. But a voice that is still calling, that has been calling so long it has forgotten how to expect an answer, that we cannot walk away from. It is not courage, exactly. It is closer to an itch we would rather die than fail to scratch. The galaxy would learn this about us, and it would not have the words for it, because the galaxy had spent 9 generations training itself to do the opposite. Aldous took it to the whole wardroom because she was that kind of captain, and there was an argument, and it was a good one, the kind an honest ship should have. The navigator laid it out cold. We would lose all comms the moment we crossed the rim, which meant no call for help of our own, no relay, no rescue. The engineer worried about the scatter tearing at our optics and our shielding. The exec, who was a good officer, said the word that had to be said, which was orders, and said it more than once, and was right too. And every one of them, when they had said their piece, looked at the playback ticking away on the table, that slow, patient here, and none of them could quite meet it. It was the young comms rating, Vesa, barely a year out of training, who said the thing that ended the argument. She was junior enough that she should have kept quiet and green enough that she didn't know she should. She said, "If it were us in there, sir, if it were the antiphon dead in the hush, calling on the slow band for 100 years, what would we want the next ship that heard us to do?" Nobody answered her because there was no answering her, and Aldous, who had been listening, which is what she did, stood up and said we would cross. She logged the decision honestly. She did not pretend it was in the orders. She wrote that a distress signal of confirmed intelligent origin had been isolated within the hush, that its origin predated our records of the region, and that the antiphon would enter to render aid, accepting the loss of communications and the risk to the ship, because rendering aid to a call for help was the older law and the better one. Then she signed it and she looked at me and she said, "You brought it to me, Reuben. You keep the beat. Whatever the dark does to us in there, you keep us on that signal and you bring us to it." I said, "Yes, Captain. It is the proudest yes of my life." We crossed the rim at the start of the middle watch, slow, all guns cold, running dark and quiet the way a listening ship knows how to run, and the hush closed over us like water over a stone. I have crossed hard places before. I have ridden out iron storms and threaded wreck fields and sat through the long black between stars where the mind starts inventing company to keep. The hush was none of those. The hush was a smothering. Within an hour our long-range comms were gone, not jammed but dissolved, every channel filling with a soft, formless roar like the inside of a shell held to the ear, and it did not stop, and it did not change. And after a day of it, men began to flinch at silence when it came because they had started to need the roar to feel that time was passing. The optics milked over as the navigator had warned. The stars ahead smeared and doubled and finally vanished into a dim brown murk, and we flew blind and deaf into a dark that ate everything we threw into it. Everything but the one signal I was holding. Because that held. That was the thing. Down at the very bottom of the band, on that slow, patient breath, the pulse held and it grew, hour by hour, day by day, stronger as we closed, and I lived on it. I did not leave the board. Aldous ordered me to sleep, and I slept in the chair with one ear on the feed. The whole ship narrowed down in those days to the width of that one signal, and I was the man holding the thread, and I felt the weight of every soul aboard riding on my not losing it in the mud. "Here," it said, closer now, stronger now. "Here, here." I began, God forgive me, to answer it under my breath. "Coming," I'd murmur to the board in the dead middle of the watch. "We're coming. Keep calling. We hear you." I don't know that a man should talk to a signal like it can hear him. But I did for 3 days in the dark, and I am not ashamed of it. We found it on the 4th day inside. It came up first as a shadow in the murk, a denser dark against the brown, and then the near optics, straining, gave us a shape, and the shape stopped every conversation on the bridge cold. It was a ship. Or it had been a ship once, and then it had been many ships lashed together, and then it had been a place. It was vast, larger than anything we carried. A whole drifting hulk grown outward in rings and spars and welded-on hulls, generation upon generation of them. An old vessel that some people had climbed aboard a very long time ago and never climbed off, building outward as they were born and died, until the ship they came in was buried somewhere in the heart of the thing like a seed in a fruit. It was scarred beyond reckoning, pocked and patched, whole sections dark and cold and clearly long dead, and other sections, a bare few, near the old core, showing the thin, stubborn, unmistakable glow of light meant for living eyes. And from the very heart of it, from a spine of old antenna barely holding together, the pulse went out. Here, here, here. I had my hand on the board when we came close enough to see the transmitter itself, and I took my hand off it because it felt like something you should not touch with a working hand while it was still speaking. Somebody had built that beacon a long time ago. Somebody had tended it since. Down all those generations in the smothering dark, with their world reduced to a drifting hulk, and their sky reduced to brown murk, and no reason on the face of it to believe anyone would ever come. Somebody had kept the beacon fed and kept it true, and kept it saying here, 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 handing the duty down from parent to child like a sacred thing, because to stop would be to agree they were already dead. They were not dead. That was the thing that broke us open standing on that bridge. As we came alongside, slow and open-handed, lights showing, every weapon cold and stowed, ports and figures began to appear at the living sections of the hulk, small at that distance, crowding what viewports still held air, and though we could not yet see them well, we could see what they were doing, which was pressing themselves to the glass. Not fleeing, not manning guns if they had any. Pressing themselves to the glass to look at us, the way you would look at a thing you had prayed for so long that you had stopped believing your own prayer, and here it was, come out of the dark at last. I will not pretend I know what happened in the days after we made contact as well as I know the days before, because I was a signals chief, not a diplomat, and once we had them, the work of it passed to abler hands than mine. But I know the shape of it. They were people, the Ashanu, though we did not have the name yet, descendants of a colony fleet that had entered the hush 9 generations before, in a time when their kind still dared such things, seeking passage or shelter or something on the far side, and had been caught the way everything is caught in there, comms gone, optics blind, no way back. They had not died. They had done the harder thing. They had found the dead core of a still older wreck already adrift in the murk, and they had lashed their fleet to it, and they had lived thinned, hungry, generation after generation, burying their dead in the cold outer rings and raising their children in the warm inner ones, and all the while, without fail, keeping the beacon calling on the far chance that the silence they had been taught to fear was not, in fact, deaf. We got them out. It took weeks, and it was hard, ugly, patient work, the unglamorous kind. The Antiphon was never built to carry a colony, and we packed them into every hold and passage we had, and we rationed hard and breath thin and made it work because the alternative was to leave people behind, and that we would not do. And when we had every living soul off that hulk, all of them, the old and the young and the ones born on the way out, we turned the Antiphon's blind nose toward the nearest rim, which was the far one, the one we had never seen, and we ran for the light. We came out of the hush on a morning I will remember when I have forgotten my own name. The murk thinned, and then all at once tore away like a wet cloth pulled off a window, and there was space again, real space, hard black and clean stars, the first true stars any of us had seen in weeks, and the first true stars anyone aboard that hulk had seen in 9 generations. And there, waiting on the far rim, holding station in a long, careful arc across our path, was a fleet. I had my hands on the board when it resolved, and I froze, and the whole bridge froze, because we had come out of the forbidden dark blind and deaf into the guns of a people we had never met, in a ship full of strangers, with nothing to say for ourselves. And I remember thinking, in that first cold second, that we had crossed 4 light-years of impossible dark to rescue a colony only to be shot to pieces by their cousins the moment we carried them home. They did not shoot. I understand now why they did not, though I did not then. To the Ashanu on that picket line, and it was a picket, we learned, a sacred watch they had kept on the far rim for 9 generations, exactly as their kin on the near side kept theirs. The hush was not a hazard. It was a holy place and a forbidden one. Their whole faith, the thing that held their scattered coalition together, was built around it, that long ago their people had been swallowed by the silence, and that the faint keening any patient Ashanu instrument could hear coming out of that dark was the voices of their drowned dead, calling, and that the one unbreakable law, the law above all their other laws, was that the silence must never be answered and never be crossed. To answer was to invite the dead across the threshold. To cross was to join them. For 9 generations they had sat their pickets on both rims and listened to their dead call, and mourned and forbidden, and not one of them had ever gone in, because going in was the worst sin their people had a word for. And out of that silence on that morning came a ship no Ashanu had ever seen, of no shape they knew, crewed by a species that did not exist in any of their records, and it came out slow, and open with its weapons cold and its lights showing. And it was carrying in every hold and passage, alive, thin, blinking in the hard new starlight, the drowned dead of the Ashanu people, come home. We did not know how to talk to them yet. That would come, slowly, with much patience on both sides, and I was there for some of it, and it was the great privilege of my life. But before any of that, before the first word was exchanged, there was a long, long moment on that rim where the two fleets simply held, facing each other across the clean black, and nobody fired and nobody fled, and the only thing that moved was the Ashnu formation slowly, slowly opening, not to englobe us, not to trap us, but to make a lane, to make a road, to stand aside, weapons lowered, and let the ship that had done the forbidden thing carry the forbidden cargo through. I found out later from the Ashanu themselves what their picket commander said in that moment, because it went into their record, and their record became, in time, something closer to scripture. She was old, that commander, the keeper of the far threshold, and she had sat that watch her whole life listening to what she believed were her dead calling from a dark no one must ever cross. And when a ship came out of that dark carrying those same lost voices alive in its arms, she did not order the guns to fire, though the law of 9 generations told her the dead were crossing the threshold and must be stopped. She ordered the lane made. And when her own officers, shaking, asked her how she dared set aside the highest law, how she knew this was not the very horror the law was written to prevent, she gave them an answer that their people have argued over ever since, and that I think about more than anything I have ever heard. She said, "We forbade the crossing because we believed the silence could not be answered. We were wrong. It could be answered. It simply took a people willing to answer it. That is not a horror. That is a rebuke." We spent a long time among the Ashanu after that. The colony we carried out were welcomed as what they were, which was the lost come home, and I will not try to describe that reunion because there is no describing it, and it was not mine to describe. I only sat at my board in the harbor of their homeworld and listened to 100 generations of grief let go at once, and it was the loudest quiet I have ever heard. The Ashanu did not know what to make of us. They studied us the way you study a thing that has broken your understanding of the world gently, and with a kind of fear, and the question they kept coming back to, in every conversation, in every form, was always the same one, and they never quite believed our answer. "Why did you cross?" they asked. "You did not know us. You did not know the silence was ours or that the dead calling were our dead. You had a law of your own that told you to hold at the rim, and you had every reason in the deep dark to leave it alone, as everyone always leaves it alone. Why did you cross?" And we told them the truth, which was the only answer we had, and which sounded to them like a mystery and to us like the plainest thing in the world. Because something was calling for help, we said, and it had been calling a very long time, and we were quiet enough to hear it. What else would we have done? They never got over that. I don't think they ever will. To a people who had built a religion out of leaving the silence alone, out of the hard, sober, grief-taught wisdom that some voices in the dark must not be answered, the idea that another people had heard the same call and simply could not answer it was not comforting. It was overwhelming. It reordered them. In the years I spent among them, I watched a faith that had stood for 9 generations quietly turn itself inside out, not from any argument we made, because we made none, but from the bare fact of us, the fact that we had come out of the dark they feared carrying the dead they mourned, alive, and that when they asked us why we had only shrugged and said a call is a call. I am old now and my listening days are behind me, and I have handed my board to younger and better ears. But I still keep, in a drawer I do not open often, a clean recording of that first pulse, the slow patient Here I pulled out of the mud on the 9th day at the rim of the hush, before we knew what it was or whose it was or how long it had been calling. Sometimes, on the bad nights, I take it out and I play it, and I sit with it, that steady beat holding its time across a floor of noise, refusing to speed up in panic or slow down in despair. saying here into the dark on the slimmest chance that someone, someday, would be quiet enough and stubborn enough to hear. Somebody built that beacon a long time ago, in the worst dark there is, with no earthly reason to believe it would ever be answered. And they kept it calling anyway. I have spent my whole life listening to the space between the stars, and if there is one thing all those years of nothing taught me, it is this. The dark is never as deaf as it looks, and the distance between the lost and the found is only ever as wide as the patience of whoever is willing to listen, and the courage of whoever is willing to answer. We were quiet enough to hear it, and then we crossed.